I want y'all to know that I read my little post-it that says press record for all the people who can't be here right now because they're in class. I promised I would write a post-it.
What's really great is I'm recognizing a lot of these places from having judged different contests and checked out a lot of different student media outlets. So this is a great collection of folks. Thank you guys for coming out here.
Oh, we do. We have people from all over the state. Cassie Dickerson, she is the vice president of TIPA, and she's going to be monitoring the chat for us as well. Give us a wave, Cassie, so we know who you are, and keeping track of there. So people feel free to drop in some questions as you have them, and she'll be watching for that. But we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to say hello and welcome to our students and advisors from all across the state. For those of you who don't know me, I am Julie Reed. I am the executive director of TIPA, and I'm also the student media advisor here at Baylor University. So, as I said, feel free to use the chat throughout to ask questions. But we are excited to have with us today Vince Filak, a journalism professor at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. He's widely known in college media circles, and as you heard, he's judged contests for quite a while, and judged our TIPA contest as well. And he has published 6 journalism textbooks. Is that correct? And you have how many more going?
Yeah, I don't know I gave up counting because it was being a little depressing, but no, a goodly number. How's that for an answer?
He has a goodly number and and more in the works. Dynamics of news reporting and editing, dynamics of media editing, and his blog, dynamicsofwriting.com. You should put that at the top of your reading list. It is, well, dynamic. It's a must read for college journalists and professors. Vince is on a virtual tour. He's dropping in on newsrooms and classes across the country, and we thought it'd be nice for him to catch all of Texas at once. One thing we see students struggling with year after year is staying on the surface when it comes to their reporting. So we asked Vince to come talk to us about taking our storytelling to new depths. So thank you, Vince, for coming, and you can take it away.
Great, thank you, and thank you all for coming out as part of the Furlough Tour. The joke started back in the fall. Our university was $18 million in debt, and the way that they decided to try to fix that was by putting all of us faculty members on furlough, meaning that they didn't want us to come in and work, and they didn't want to pay us for that. So I was joking on the blog at one point, and I said. Well, look, I'm not going to waste time just sitting around being grumpy. So, I'm going to have a furlough tour. I'm just going to like take my furlough days and I'll volunteer to come speak to your class, or I'll drive out wherever you are, or whatever you need. And I meant it kind of like partially as a snarky kind of joke at my university, but also kind of like I kind of figured like maybe 2 or 3 people will be like, that's cute. We're good here. I had like 28 people come to me like, hey, we need you. So there's like a big post-it note back here of like all the places that I've already been. And then over on the whiteboard is kind of like I'm checking off places that I'm going. So I've been to like 4 or 5 states in person. I've gotten to meet a lot of nice people like you all. And I really do enjoy it. Plus, the joke also came out that I said if I sold out all 11 days, which clearly I did, I'd sponsor a tour t-shirt. So I always wear the tour t-shirt on the day of the thing because it just, if you can't laugh at yourself, you're in the wrong business. So, but thank you so much for coming today. I always believe very strongly that this is more your time than my time. So I set it up so that I'm going to talk about some stuff, but please put a boatload of questions in that chat. Please ask a lot of questions. I come from a very old Polish Catholic family where when we gather with other people, our duty is, if you leave our presence hungry or sober, that's your fault. And I like to teach that way too, in the sense of like, I don't want you walking out thinking, oh, and that's the other thing. The university doesn't trust me with lights. So we got to kind of occasionally wave and turn the lights on. But again, if you leave my presence and you're like, well, that was a pointless exercise. I didn't get what I wanted out of it. I don't want that to happen. So ask whatever you want, as much as you want. I will spend as much time with y'all as you want. But I don't write hour-long speeches to belabor the point. So but getting back to what Julie mentioned, she said about students struggling with, and the quote that I pulled was, I see my students struggling with, and no doubt other campuses are the same, is staying on the surface. I'm seeing a dearth of deep dives, investigative and data-driven journalism, watchdog journalism, in-depth features. What we do have is an abundance and truckloads of fluffy editorials. And so the question that started this off was like, can you help? And I said, well, what's the best way to get into all of this? And I guess if I had one piece of advice to kind of help you to move towards getting away from fluffy editorials and getting away from the surface stuff, is what I call the rule number one, which is you aren't writing for yourself, you're writing for other people. One of the main reasons why we end up doing a lot of fluffy editorials and stuff like that is because we want to write about things we care about. And okay, that's fine. But ask yourself this question: does anybody else care about that thing? I remember when I was advising student media, I had a student come to me and I said, well, what are you working on? And he said, oh, it's a very important editorial. And I said, well, what is it? And he says, I am writing about how the US should annex Puerto Rico. And I honestly thought he was like punking me. I thought there was this play in a movie called Little Giants called The Annexation of Puerto Rico. And I thought it was like, yeah, I was getting punked. And I said, really? He's like, well, yes. And I said, okay, but why would anybody who's reading the Advanced Titan here at UW Oshkosh care about this? And he got really mad. He like got all stiff. He's like, everyone should care. And I'm like, okay, well, A, do they? B, why should they? And C, what's the point of this thing going into a student newspaper on a regional campus in the middle of Wisconsin? He didn't get it, but my point was this: writing about things that you care about without thinking about if your audience cares about them or if it matters to your audience is like making a career choice to become a chef at a very nice restaurant simply because you like to eat. A chef is cooking for other people. So that's where the joy and the purpose has to live. And it's the same thing for writers. You have to live in the joy of doing for others. I wouldn't want to go somewhere at a restaurant and order a steak and lobster dinner and have my server walk out with a plate of weird green stuff and say, the chef feels strongly that people should be eating more organically braised kale. So enjoy. That's not how this should work. And that's also not how writing should work. In terms of trying to focus on that first rule, and that'll help a lot. But in terms of writing on the surface stuff, the reason why we end up doing it is because A, it's easy, and B, we've been trained to grind. Journalism is feeding the grist mill every day. And I'll be honest with you, my first couple of jobs, I was on night cops, and then I was on the police beat, and then I worked night desk. So my job basically was that kind of grinded up kind of stuff. It was, there's a shooting, go cover it. Somebody robbed a Taco Bell, go cover it. You have to plug in for somebody who's late, go cover a meeting. So I got used to the idea of bang out 12-inch stories in my sleep and be done with it. And there's nothing wrong with learning how to bang out stuff like speech and meeting stories, especially if you can find stuff that is valuable to your readers. I mean, that's, again, your meeting rule number one. So if there's something going on out there that people need or want to know about, a surface level piece is fine. I got lucky enough. Julie let me do some judging for TIPA on breaking news. And it was great to see that level of like, go get them kind of journalism. So there's nothing wrong with that. But as much as journalism is about quantity, it's also about quality. And you can't spend your whole life doing nothing but those 8-inch, 12-inch, bang them out kind of stories, or you're going to want to throw yourself in front of a bus at some point in life. So you have to understand that quality endures while quantity fades. I can't tell you how many stories I've written, but I can tell you about the really good ones. And maybe this is a better way of looking at it. Here's what I mean. Every year when you see students come to campus, they got to outfit their new apartment, right? So first thing you got to do, you go look for furniture and stuff, and you go to like Walmart or IKEA or whatever, and you find this $50 tag board, assemble it with little nuts and bolts kind of piece of crap kitchen table that you're just going to build for the year. Now there's nothing wrong with owning a piece of furniture like that, especially if you're a student and you're on a budget, and especially if your roommates are kind of people who view vodka as a food group and throw more parties than a birthday clown on meth. So that's okay, but it's never going to retain value or have lasting power. Every time throughout the year I drive up and down campus, I see the broken ones of those things tossed on the side of the road. A leg broke off, a side fell off, the table top got warped up and broke, whatever. Now, contrast that with the table that my great grandmother bought the year that my grandmother was born. Now, it lived in her house for decades, and it was where all the meals of the family were held, all the bills were paid, all the problems were discussed, all of the situations in the family were dealt with. When the holidays came, they opened it up and they put a couple of leaves into it so you could have more people and you could have everybody who needed to be there kind of enjoy it. So after she died, her son took it and he used it in his art studio. And it got banged around by easels and paint was dripped all over it and brushes were left to dry and water fell on it and stuff. So when he died, my mom and I had to go clean out his apartment. And we see this table sitting there and it's just beat to hell. And my mother just, she's going to cry. And she says, that was where we used to have all of our best family gatherings. And now we're going to have to throw this thing in the trash. I said, there's no way you're throwing it in the trash. I'm taking it with me. It'll be fine. I took it home. I stripped down all the stuff that was on top of it. I sanded out all the imperfections. I revarnished it. And to this day, this 103-year-old table is sitting in my dining room, and it looks just as good as the day it was when it was made. My point being that you can't just rely on throwaway crap if you plan to have any kind of value in this field. Sure, my great grandmother's table probably cost more than $50, more than the IKEA Wonder over there, but it's worth more. It carries on and it retains value. And you want to have at least some of that in your portfolio, and you want to have at least some of that in your work so that you can show, yeah, there is quality to go along with that quantity. So I guess the question that most people ask is, okay, Smarty, how do you get there? How do you go beyond the surface? How do you dig in? Well, I'm going to give you three things that I think might help you find those stories and kind of stick with them. First thing, open up your brain. My favorite quote ever from a freelancer was a woman named Jenna Glatz. She basically said that being able to come up with good story ideas that kind of challenge you and kind of like open up your brain to stuff is the idea of learning to think that everything you experience could be a really good deep story. Um, so she was talking about how like once you've learned kind of how to open the aperture on your mind, how to kind of just let stuff come into you, you're going to be up to this ability to generate a lot of story ideas. You're going to be amazed how much more perceptive you become. Um, Conversations you have will be like, ooh, that could be a story. There could be something that you see in a parking lot when you're driving. You're like, oh, wow, that looks kind of interesting. Um, Everything that you do kind of like plays off of one another. Here's an example of what I mean by that. This after I kind of got what she was talking about, I was on a trip. I was coming back from Boston to Milwaukee, so after a conference, and they get us on this plane in Boston, and we're sitting on the tarmac, and we're waiting to take off, and it's taking like forever. And of course, everybody in the plane is like complaining, I got to go do this. I got to do this. What the hell's wrong? Blah, 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 blah. I'm all the way in the back by the flight attendants and stuff. And I just happened to lean over and I said, I'm not upset, but do you know why we're not taking off yet? And one of the ladies said to me, she goes, yeah, we got the crew, we got everybody. We can't get your bags on the plane. They cut baggage carriers at this airport to the point where they don't have enough people to put luggage on the plane. And all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, that could be cool. Like who made the decision? How many baggage carriers are there? How many does it take to load a plane? How fast do they load planes? What's life like for one of those people on the ground? You see them scurrying around all the time, like throwing stuff on and loading stuff up. What is it like? There could be like this great profile on there. There could be this deep dive on like how much money this is costing us because something's sitting on a tarmac burning fuel like crazy while they're waiting for somebody to, toss your carry-on, which is basically a, refrigerator box with a handle duct tape to it onto the plane. So I get flown to Boston. I got to hit Detroit and then I puddle hop over Lake Michigan back to Milwaukee. I get there, I'm late. And they say, go to this gate, you're going to get in. So I go to this gate, which I thought was the next plane. Turns out it's like this Disneyland style line of all the people who have just been told they're too late for their flight. I get up to the front. I'm like, I need to get out of here. And she's like, all the flights are gone. We can't do anything for you, but we're going to give you this voucher for a free night at a hotel room and a meal. And immediately my brain starts going like, wait a minute. Why? How does this make sense? Why not put all of us on one plane, just shoot us over Lake Michigan and get us there? It's got to cost you money. Like, how much money does it cost to have these vouchers? How do you get the voucher program to work? How does this, like, where's the cost benefit analysis here? And then I'm like, I am not leaving this airport. I'm not taking a hotel room. I'm not leaving this airport. I've had that happen before where all of a sudden you're locked out. And they're like, no, 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 it's in the airport. I'm like, what? They're like, there's a hotel in the airport. And I'm like, oh my God, where? And she's like, just keep walking down past like where that hat shop is. And I'm like, okay, I start walking. And all of a sudden it's like a Harry Potter move. There's Diagon Alley. It just opens up and I can see this hotel lobby. And all I could think to myself was, who the hell stays in the Detroit airport? Like, is this on purpose? Do people like plan something to be here? Is it for mostly overnight travelers, or is it just kind of like this Casablanca of like all us rejects who didn't have any place else to go? I was curious to know how much it costs to stay there. What kinds of things, what makes it different than any other airport? Also, they had a little station where you could check in for security. So, I mean, you had to do the shoes and everything when you wanted to go back out into the airport. I'm like, how is this different than every other one of these things? Like, who has to sanction this? I get really excited about this. Anyway, go upstairs, go to bed, come back downstairs. I, of course, smell of jet fuel and rage as I'm like walking into the elevator. And the doors open up. There are four women, probably about 40-ish. They are all dressed the same. They've got black blazer, black to the knee skirt, black tights, black flats, and a different colored kind of blouse. And they're all wearing these name tags. And I'm like, are you all going someplace? Because again, I'm nosy. And they're like, oh yeah, we have a convention here. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, who the hell books a convention for the Detroit Airport Hotel? Like, we got a hard enough time for like CMA, or I'm sure for student media conferences. It's like, where are you going? Phoenix. I'm not sure I want to go there. Can you imagine, like, hey, it's a hotspot. It's the Detroit airport. Ooh, fly in and don't ever walk anywhere. So I start wondering, like, how many conventions do they have? What do they do there? How many, like, different, like, what a weird convention. And I look down as we're in the elevator, these four women are talking, and I'm looking down the glass elevator, and there are all women exactly the same. It looked like they all got stamped out of like a Lane Bryant catalog or something. They're just like all wandering around, and they're all dressed the same, but they're all wearing these name tags. And on the bottom, there are these ribbons that say something like $100,000 seller, $250,000 seller, $500,000 seller. Somebody had a gold one that said $1 million seller. And I said, of course, I asked, what convention is this? And I'm thinking like real estate. I'm thinking, something like that. Laser hair removal. 3 days in the Detroit Airport Hotel talking about laser hair removal. My first thought is, how in the hell do you make $1 million selling laser hair removal to people? How do you like, and what are these sessions going to be like? Like, I mean, you think like 8 hours a day, 24 hours worth of sessions minimum of this is how you like, what do you do? Do you like walk up to people and go, wow, you look like Captain Kangaroo. Here's my card. I don't get it. Like, I was just stunned and fascinated. I am just amazed. And again, I could go on and on and on about the rest of this flight and the $5 I had to spend on a Diet Coke. But the point is that once you open your mind to stuff, once you stop being plugged in everywhere where you're constantly looking down at your phone, or you constantly have your headphones on, or you're constantly trying to just ignore stuff, the better off you're going to be in terms of like being able to see stuff. Like, I'm like, even just looking in the background in your office, and I'm looking like, oh, I wonder about that painting, or hey, there's a pug pillow, or these different things that go into your head. But the second big thing is you got to learn how to wonder again. Little kids are great. For those of you who have experienced time with little kids, they are fantastic. I wish I loved anything as much as my 2-year-old niece loves bubbles. I have videos of her like jumping up and down and jumping up and down after she blows a bubble, and she smacks all the bubbles and then she jumps up and down again. And I'm like, I don't love anything that much. Like, I wish I did. But the other thing is that kids wonder. They have this amazing sense of wonder. Um, if you've ever spent any time with a 4-year-old, you will know what the answer to this question is. What is a 4-year-old's favorite question? Why? That's all they want to know how stuff works, why it happens. They want answers to everything. At some point we stop asking why. Maybe it's because we get into like grade school or middle school and we worry about looking stupid, or we stop caring. Maybe it's you get to high school and you get that disaffected youth thing of like, I'm too cool to care or whatever. But we stop engaging with the world around us and we no longer enjoy that wonderment these little kids experience. And really, that's a damn shame because wondering about stuff will lead you to truly some incredible stories. If you want to get people doing deeper stories, take the five W's and one H and make them pair them with the phrase, I wonder. And you'll get some pretty cool story ideas out of it. Here are a couple that just kind of rattled through my brain this week. One is, I wonder why I can't get a Diet Coke out of our vending machines. I drink nothing but Diet Coke. If you see me without a Diet Coke, immediately call the authorities. I'm being kidnapped. But there's one place on this campus where I can buy a Diet Coke. It's a convenience store that's stuffed like way off the side of the campus. Every place else, every vending machine, every outlet, every little open thing, every little grocery mart thing, all I can get is Diet Pepsi, which to me tastes like I'm licking a piece of chemically treated sheet metal. Um, so why? Well, because our campus has a vending contract with the Pepsi Mafia, so I'm stuck. So that makes me wonder, like, okay, why? How do we get stuck with Pepsi? How does your university decide who gets what vending contracts? How long are those vending contracts? What kind of cash do they get for saying, no Diet Coke drinkers, walk your butt off campus and go find it somewhere else? Who gets to say in where that kind of money goes? I mean, I'm sure it makes a boatload of cash given what I see these kids walking around here with like these power energy drinks out of vending machines. Um, I wonder what the hardest scholarship to get on your campus is. What is the least often claimed scholarship on your campus? Every year I have to do campus scholarships. So I get like all of the people who apply for different things. And there are certain rules, obviously, for certain ones. So like I get ones where it's like you have to be a member of the Advanced Titan student newspaper, or you have to have a C or better in this field, or you have to have at least, you have to be fluent in French or whatever it is. There's all these different rules and regulations. Like what is the one that's the hardest to achieve? What is the least given out one? Is it something weird like you've got to be a banjo player of Bohemian descent, or you have like perfect attendance ever since kindergarten? Every year we give out tons and tons of money, but there's tons of stuff that doesn't get claimed because nobody's qualified for it. What is that stuff and who gave it? I'd be curious to know what that is. I often this is my favorite one. I wonder if that law really exists. I can't tell you the number of times where somebody told me I could or couldn't do something. And again, when I said why, they said, well, there's a rule. And I said, oh, really? Okay, show it to me. And they couldn't find it. One of my favorite ones was when I was I was an advisor at Ball State, and there was and somebody got tricked into allowing a director to use one of the historic homes on campus for what he said was a horror movie. Turned out it was vampire porn. And so you've got Ball State's like Virginia Ball Center for Inquiry featured very prominently in this movie. I'm using the term loosely. Well, the director kept making claims about certain things after the university was trying to get rid of it. And one claim that he made was that teachers and students were on-air talent for this. So the kids went out and bought the DVD. And when I was not in the newsroom and had plausible deniability elsewhere in the state, they watched it with like 6 or 7 laptops open looking for photos of people that might or might not be in there. So when we got done with it, I tried to expense that. And the university said, you can't expense pornography. And I said, why? It's a legitimate reporting expense. And the guy said, the guy says, we're just not doing it. And I call him up because he said, call me if you have a problem. I call him and he says, well, there are rules about what you can buy. I said, show it to me. And he says, well, it has to be for a valid, I said, it's for a valid reporting thing. And he said, well, actually, with DVDs, there's a rule. And I said, well, I was on the Campus Activities Fund Board, and I know what the rules are for DVDs. First, the university can't already own it. And second of all, when you're done with it, you have to donate it to Bracken Library. And we're more than happy to donate it to the, and he's like, wait, he freaked out. So after a while, he kind of decided, he's like, how big of a deal are you going to make about this? And I said, well, we'll see. And the kids didn't want to make that big of a deal about it, but I still have the receipt and the letter that says you can't have porn. It's on my wall. So the idea being like, I wonder what the rule is. Like, I wonder about, there are certain rules that people always say exist that don't exist. I'm sure there are campus myths on yours. The one that's on our campus is that certain housing places too close to campus cannot rent to a certain number of people, because if you have more than X number of unmarried women in a house under Wisconsin law, it constitutes a brothel. It's not true. It's been debunked 100 times, but that keeps coming up. And we're like, okay. So there's all these different rules and laws and stuff that people swear. Again, here we go. I wonder why the university doesn't trust me to turn off my own lights. I guess that would be another one. But you wonder about that stuff and you think to yourself, like, I wonder if that's really a rule or not, or if it's just like, kind of, we're just hoping nobody notices. The last one I wonder about, and this is my favorite one because this actually did happen. I wonder what other people are wondering about. Freedom of Information Act and state open records make certain documents open to the public. So if you're at a public institution, you can get all sorts of documents about stuff. You can get people's salaries, you can get departmental budgets, you can get contracts the university signs, and all sorts of other stuff. If you're at a private, if there are public entities signing contracts with your entities, you can go to those public entities and get them. So Baylor is private, if I'm recalling this correctly. So let's say that the University of Texas at Austin makes signs a contract to play softball against Baylor University, and there's a financial incentive in that contract. Well, Baylor doesn't have to give you a damn thing, but you can get that open records request from Texas at Austin because they're a public institution. But the one thing that most people don't think to do an open records request on is open records requests. I had a student do this once. He was the most ingenious kid I've ever met. He ended up becoming a lawyer in Montana, but he fell in love with the Open Records Act in Wisconsin, or in Indiana, rather. And I remember he's like sorting paper when we had to do all by paper. And I said, "What are you FOIAing now?" And he said, "I'm FOIAing FOIA." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm doing an open records request on the open records request the university's gotten over the past 6 months." And I said, "Oh my God, why?" He goes, "I just want to find out what the Muncie Star Press is working on." So he basically backdoored the city newspaper, finding out again, just being kind of like, I wonder what's going on. The third big thing, and this is the one that's the hardest, but it is the most important. You got to give a damn. The best bit of advice I ever got from somebody when I was writing a bigger piece was that I needed to make sure that I cared about it. Charles Davis, who's now the dean of journalism at the University of Georgia, he was an assistant professor at Missouri when I was doing my doctorate. And I was talking to him about, like, how do you do a dissertation? Like, how do you do this? And he explained to me that completing a dissertation, which, if you don't know, is basically this giant monstrosity of research that no one will ever read. You'll just put it on your bookshelf when it's done, and then you like pull it out a little farther than all the other books on your shelf so people notice it, and that's all it ever does. But he said the only way it was possible to get through this thing was if you cared about what you were doing and you really wanted to find the answers to the problem you were tackling. The quote he gave me was this, and I still love this. I have it written down. I find it all the time. "It's like a marriage," he said. "It will be with you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, until death or degree do you part." And I thought about that a lot whenever I'm writing a longer blog post, or whenever I'm writing a book, or anything other than those brief and curious emails to, those brief but courteous emails to students that explain, like, no, I'm not changing your grade after I filed this. Look, it's not my fault. You missed so much class that, we almost held a candlelight vigil for you in class. But everything else that's longer that I'm like, this is going to take some time. I think about giving a damn. Now, there's a great case in point, which is, it came out just this week. There's this fantastic story in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel by a reporter by the name of Mary Spicuzza. In 1978 in Milwaukee, her cousin Augie was killed by a car bomb, something that her family never spoke of. Even now, she said that she went and talked to her last living relative about this, and they're like, "Do not talk about this." And she cared about those. So she spent like more than a year digging into the history of her family, the history of Augie and his indiscretions over life, and how this very powerful mob boss in Milwaukee kind of ran afoul with Augie and basically pretty much likely ordered the car bombing that took his life. And if you read the piece, which I do recommend, you can find it online, you get the sense of the amount of work that went into this thing and how much digging it took. And you think about the question, and she answers it nicely in there. I said, why in the hell do you do this? And the answer was she needed to find that answer. And she thought her audience would want to know too, because it was a very famous incident in Milwaukee. In short, she gave a damn. When I think about the stories that I wrote that I liked the most, they were probably the ones where I just gave a damn the most. So I cared about when I was breaking a story about how the KKK was putting pamphlets in grocery store free newspaper racks trying to scare people in that area. I gave a damn when it came to whether or not there was going to be a local racetrack that was going to close down and cost hundreds of people their jobs and thousands of dollars to the community. Even more, I felt really passionate about this idea where I did a 6-part series for the blog on mass shootings and college campuses and stuff. So much so that I wore a bulletproof vest everywhere I went for 6 days just to try to get some semblance of a way to kind of wrap my head around this whole thing. Even when I write books, I guess I think less about like, what do I want to tell you and more about what do you really need and want? And then how do I give it to you in a way that's going to make you want it and care about it? So I guess what I can tell you is this: if you care, you'll get into it and you'll be like a dog with a frisbee. You're not going to let go and you're going to be really satisfied before you decide that, okay, I'm done with this thing. And really that can do a lot for your audience. So that's it. But I'm totally happy to answer any questions that you have, no matter what. So I am at your disposal. Hopefully most of you stayed awake.
And you can drop those questions in the chat, or if you want to open up your mic, we can take questions that way too. And I'll go ahead and ask one to start. You made a really good point about how we've been taught to grind. Um, got to turn those stories out and turn them out. How do you kind of have a passion project or have something you really wonder about and want to dig into when your editor is saying we got to file, and we got to have something in the paper?
The key thing I think about is twofold. One is that I like to have kind of what I call the long game and the short game. Short games are those 4-inch briefs you got to bang out. They're the 80-inch stories you got to bang out. There's stuff like that. But there's also that long game of like, there's something there that intrigues me enough to want to work on it. So when I was a reporter many, many, many years ago, I was very young, very green, and I kept getting a lot of those like bang them out pieces. Well, one story that I ended up covering a lot was this firefighter who they were trying to fire him through the Police and Fire Commission because he was handing out anti-gay literature while on the job. And so I again had that wonder moment because usually what happens is you go before you go before a police and fire commission. You go like, did you do the thing they said we did? Yeah, I did. Okay, you're fired. It takes like a day, but you're on paid leave until they get to that day. This thing took on like 6 months and it was never going to end. This guy's attorney is calling all sorts of witnesses and stuff. And this guy's on paid leave. And all I wondered was, how much money is this really costing the city? So I started doing open record requests. I started digging into it. And basically the attorney was telling me, we're not doing this to siphon money out of the city. And everybody else was going like, he is running clock on this thing. It's like watching a Dean Smith offense play 4 corners because there's just no way he's going to win this thing. But he is just being annoying to prove a point. So me wanting to know, okay, I care about this, that's something. And also the idea of if something's important, you make the time for it. The bulletproof vest story actually came out of something that happened in Texas. There was a rule that was passed, and correct me if I'm not entirely right on this. One of my friends teaches down at North Texas, and she told me that there was a law passed or something that allowed for concealed carry on college campuses down there. And she was freaking out because she taught classes where there was a lot of tension. She was teaching kind of media and society and feminism and stuff. And she had kids shouting at each other and stuff. And she's like, what happens when a kid pulls a gun? And so everybody was asking questions like, well, can you tell them not to bring their gun? No. Well, can you ask who's carrying? No. Well, can you go all online? No. And finally, like, I just kind of smarted off and I said, wear Kevlar. I said, if you can't play offense, play defense. Let them know that if what you need to be comfortable in this room is to have a gun in your pocket, I need to wear this to feel comfortable. And she went, you're crazy. And I went, well, yeah, you've known that forever, but still. And I put up on the board, wear Kevlar. And it sat there for like 3 years until finally I got to the point where there had just been shooting after shooting after shooting after shooting. And I finally put a note out to somebody and I said, okay, does anybody have a bulletproof vest? I got to try something. And one of my former students actually had one. He had used it to cover the Republican National Convention actually in 2016. And so he sent me a bulletproof vest and that started the thing. But I cared about it. And so it stayed with me. Again, that's where being nosy and that's where giving a damn kind of come into play. So I see stuff popping up in the chat. Where do you want me to go with this? I'll let you kind of drive the questions on me here. So pick whichever ones you want me to do, and I'll do.
Okay, I'll just start with the first one from Magnolia. She asked, do you have any book recommendations that a writer should read? Not necessarily a self-help book, but just any kind of genre.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of Michael Lewis, who his most recent one's on Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto guy. I haven't read that one, so I can't vouch for it yet. But he wrote books like Moneyball, The New Thing, Flash Boys. He wrote, there's a whole ton of them out there. He has this amazing ability to paint scenes and to report. It's a very deep, strong read. Pretty much anything he does, I will read. Um, I'm a huge fan of Jay McInerney. He was one of the 80s nihilists because, again, his descriptive writing was so strong that it helped me to understand how having the proper word meant all the difference. And I guess if you're looking for a voice, one of my favorite books of all time is Ball Four by Jim Bouton. Came out in 1970, and it was one of the first big kind of expose books on baseball, but it really wasn't. It was a book about being human and how like these are real people. And that one I read at least once a year. So those are the ones that I go after. I'm not a huge fan of promoting textbooks because I think if you want to read a textbook, go ahead. That's fine. I write them because I know people need them. But the books that I read are basically the idea of I just love seeing people craft narratives in ways that will help me to see things in my mind's eye. So painting word pictures are kind of where I go with that.
Okay, thank you. Next one is from Lauren Ramirez, asking, how do you write for yourself while also writing for other people? How do you enjoy writing about topics that are for the people, but you don't necessarily enjoy writing about it?
Well, that's a tough call. There's a couple of things. One is again, I grew up as an only child in a stringently Catholic family, and went to 12 years of Catholic school where we were battered about by ancient nuns quite frequently. So, finding joy in pleasing other people was kind of ingrained in who I was for a very long time. So, if you're asking like, how do I do it? It's I get a lot of joy in helping you. So again, like this is the best part of my day right now. I get to like talk to you all and feel like I'm actually doing something helpful. There are times where you do write for yourself and other people. So the way I look at it is like I'm writing a textbook that, yeah, it's going to have my name on the spine, or yeah, I'm writing a blog post about something that I care about, but I know my audience well enough to know that they care about it too. It's not always an either or. It's just too often we go with the either part of it, which is to say, well, my favorite, I actually read this. I was doing column, a contest and I was reading columns, and the opening to the column of this is, I know you don't care about this topic, but I don't care what you think. Nothing shows me the bathing glow of embracing your audience like going, hey, read my column and screw you anyway. So it was very, very different. When you don't like something, it comes through in the writing. I try to find, there are times where you have to write something you don't like. I remember my mother had a subscription to the State Journal when I was a reporter, and that was back before the internet was really a thing. So they'd have to mail her the paper. And she'd always read the articles, and she was a teacher, so she always tell me stuff about what she saw. And I remember very vividly once, I don't remember what the story was, but I can still kind of see where it was in the paper. And she said, I read your story on whatever that was. I said, yeah. And she says, you didn't want to write that, did you? And I said, well, what's wrong with it? I'm thinking grammar, style, structure, clarity, whatever. She's like, no, it's fine. It's a perfectly fine piece. It's just you didn't want to write it, did you? And I said, no. She goes, I can tell it's in there. It's like when we used to come home from my grandma's house, who was the 5 pack a day smoker. We'd walk in the house and my dad's like, ah, you were Grandma Rosalind's, weren't you? It's baked into that. So what I'll tell you is that if you don't like it, you have to try to find value in it for those other people. If you really can't, I mean, there are times, I'll be honest with you, I got put on city government as an editor for about 3 months. And I went to my boss and I told him, you either have to move me or fire me because I can't do this. It doesn't work for me. And at that point, he moved me. And then I got back into crime and it was like Briar Rabbit and the Briar Patch. So what I would tell you is like, keep an open mind. Maybe you will like it once you get into it. But again, there are times where you're just not going to like it. And if that's the case, try to find a way to either maybe hand that off to somebody else or, in the old horse trade kind of way, or find a different find a different approach. Maybe that'll help. But at the end of the day, if you hate what you're writing about, it's not going to bode well for you. So try to see what you can do about finding some more things that make you happier, or at the very least, like when I write about stuff, sometimes people tell me like, I really like that you wrote that. And I'm like, okay, good. That made me feel happy because I made you feel happy.
Great. This is from Benjamin Barnes. Top 3 tips for a writer who is new to writing profiles.
Okay, sure. First tip is this: you cannot do a decent profile without spending time with that person with the sole purpose of observing. There's an acronym that we use in observation called SCAM, SCAM, which is setting, character, action, and meaning. And so you need to be able to kind of take in this person in their entirety. So again, before we started this, and I'm sitting there looking at Julie's office, setting. I'm looking in the background. I see the paintings, and they're all lined up perfectly. They're all separated perfectly. I see the books. I see the pug pillow, the couch that looked like it came from my grandmother's house and it's probably been there since Pluto was a puppy. The concrete block wall that is like every newsroom I've ever been in. It's somewhere between a bunker and like prison. And the green color. I had a '77 Ford that color. So it's that kind of setting. You learn to look around other people and see what do you surround yourself with that makes you happy. So I'm not going to move the camera. Actually, yeah, I will. Here, I'll show you. This is my office. These are all bobbleheads. And so this is the freak show that I spend my day in, literally like every day. Somebody asked me once, like, how many bobbleheads do you have? And I said, why you got to be mean like that? I'm just not coming up with that answer. But, people walk in, they're like, hey, I have a quote. Whoa. Okay. So like, what's the setting? There are people who are neat. Trust me, this place is a crap hole, but I live here, so I'm okay with that. Character, like, how do you dress? How do you act? How do you interact? There are people who are like perfectly dressed all the time. The guy next door to me, love him to death. He's a really good friend of mine, but all of his clothes have names. So if you basically go and say, hey, nice shirt. Oh yeah, it's Banana Republic. Oh yeah, it's a Ralph Lauren. Oh yeah, it's a Tommy Hilfiger. Like, I look at my clothes, I'm like, nice shirt. It's like, yeah, I think Amy bought this for me for Christmas like 8 years ago. Whereas I can tell him what engine's in his car and he goes, all I know is I turn it on and it starts. So there's that sense of character. Are they lively? Are they, how do they interact with other people? What kinds of things? So look for those kinds of things. Try to get a way to encapsulate this person, everything that makes them special and who they are. So are they the kind of person who's like really nice to only the really kind of successful people and ladder above them, and they punch down below at like the secretaries and the janitors in your building? Or are they the kind of people who are very kind to everybody that they meet? There was a profile done on Larry Bird, a very successful basketball player who was born in French Lick, Indiana, which is like a nowhere one stoplight town. And they said like they used to try to bring Larry to talk to like season ticket holders and all these. He didn't care about any of that stuff, but he knew the name of every janitor and ball boy and kind of grunt at the Boston Garden. He was just, those were his people. He would go drink beer and smoke a cheap cigar with those people, no matter what. Um, Action, I'm a huge fan of action. How do people interact? How do people react? You might notice that, like, if you wanted to silence me, all you'd have to do is tie my arms down because I talk with my hands a lot. There are people who sit still. I had a student in my class who used to sit so perfectly still. I wanted to like see if he could still fog a mirror. That kind of thing. So that's the first thing. Observation is key. I need you to be able to paint a word picture for me. The second big key is what I call building the donut around the hole. And here's what I mean by that. A hole is defined by what's around it. How big, how deep, how whatever, right? So you think about a donut. All a donut really is something around and there's a hole in the middle. Well, I look at the profile person and say, okay, here's this profile person. They're this hole, they're this nebulous thing. So how do I go about defining who they are? Well, I start looking at other people who can provide perspective to them. So, like, here's a chunk when you interview my mom. Here's a chunk when you interview my boss. Here's a chunk when you interview my best friend. Here's a chunk when you interview my wife. Here's a chunk when you interview my kid. Here's a chunk when you interview one of my students. And now you've literally have all these people who kind of like provide all that support. So now I'm much more defined as that whole. And that can help people to understand that subject a lot better. So it's not so much the number of sources, it's the variety of source. And again, good Lord, these people. So, okay. So the recording people are going to laugh their ass off to this. But the point is that you're literally building that donut around that hole so that you can better define who that is. I like to also think about it like if you think about a gem, every source is like looking through a different facet of a gem inward. So, for example, if you talk to, say, my boss about who I am, you're going to get a much different perspective than if you talk to my mom. If you talk to my best friend from high school, you're going to get a lot different perspective than if you talk to a student who was in one of my classes. That's where you get all these different perspectives. So that's how you kind of paint that picture. In most cases, people don't know themselves as well as other people do. So it's a lot easier to kind of build that donut around the hole. And then you can go back to the hole and ask a lot of questions like, hey, I was talking to your best friend from high school. What's the banana split thing that he, and it's like, oh God, don't bring that up. Okay, let me tell you the story. And I think that's the third thing is that you want to have this opportunity to look at this as I want to kind of tell a story in a way that allows people to feel like they want to know this person, or at the very least that they're fascinated by this person. That doesn't mean everybody you profile should be a good person. I mean, a lot of the best profiles I've read were about people that are like just completely despicable human beings. But it's that kind of thing where I'd love to get to know more about them. You pique the curiosity and you kind of bring them on in. Um, and a lot of that comes from trying to find sections of their life that matter to them. So it could be something like, let's say that you're going to interview somebody on the baseball team who just won MVP for the entire season. And it turned out they lost their entire junior year to like a horrific leg accident, injury at the game. You could break that down into chunks like life leading up to the injury and the recovery, the great season afterwards. We did a profile on a woman who was running for state senate, and we looked at her life in these chunks of like, um, we talked about kind of like her idealism, that sense of need to serve, like how that always became part of her. We talked about the idea of her connection to the veterans community because her father was a vet, and this whole sense of like duty, obligation, and so forth came out of the veterans thing. And then it was kind of like this duty to kind of like making the world a better place. So it was kind of like she had these like Pollyanna-ish kind of inspirations as well, but she also had kind of that hardened military thing and that sense of like duty and obligation, like she was in a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical or something. So there's these different pieces. Look for ways to kind of create pieces out of stuff. And the best piece of advice I'll give you is if you start your profile with so-and-so is not your typical college sophomore, professor, police person, fire person, go lay down, take a nap, and wake up again when that urge has passed you. Because no kidding, they're not the typical. Otherwise, you wouldn't be profiling them. Look for something that makes me want to read about them. And that's a really great way to go about doing it. What else can I tell you?
Well, I had a question. You talked a lot about curiosity, but sometimes with our students, it feels like we're pulling teeth to get them to come up with story ideas and to be curious. So, do you have any tips for how we can kind of, ignite that fire under them to be curious? Because you would think they would naturally have that curiosity going into journalism, but for some of them, it's just not all there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And here's how I've done it. And again, that's not to say it's the way to do it, but um you ask a lot of questions that make them think. So I asked, we're talking about like stories to do and something like that. And we're talking about different things. And I said, okay, they're like, we don't do anything. We're not from anywhere. We're not blah, blah, blah. It's that whole like disaffected emo youth thing. And I'm like, okay, what do you do when you're not here? I work. Okay, where do you work? Well, I'm a server. Okay, where are you a server? I'm over here. Okay. So we start talking about being a server. And I said, okay. So I always wondered, like, do you deal with people who like send food back that you know that it's fine, but they end up like, and so it was like, oh my God, there's this guy at my restaurant every freaking time. We don't make his dinner right because he wants to get it for free. Oh my God, that pisses me off. And it's like, well, what happens to that food? Well, we have to throw it away. But there's some guys who like actually like take it out and they give it to people. Like, okay, so what about that? And we start digging into this stuff. And then like somebody else chimed in with, well, up by us, we have these things called supper clubs, which is basically you put in your food order at the bar, you sit there and you drink until you're like, whoa, I need food. And then they take you to get your salad and soup at your table and stuff. It's Wisconsin. We drink a lot of beer. But the idea is like this kid was doing, there was somebody who was a waitress at a supper club, and there was somebody who was a hostess at a supper club. And they're kind of like going back and forth on these stories of like, oh yeah, Mr. Big. I'm like, what's Mr. Big? It's like he lives up there, he's got a cottage, he's the guy with the big boat, he thinks he deserves everything, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really? Yeah. It's like, and he always did. And I'm like, what did he always do? And she's like, well, he'd always put a move on you if you're a girl. And I'm like, ew. Like, how old were you? She was like, I was 14. I'm like, oh my God. And everyone's like, oh yeah, these guys get handsy up at supper. I'm like, oh my God. And they're like, oh my God, that'd be a story. I'm like, yeah. Um, Again, you just start asking questions of people and you start realizing that they don't see the normal parts of their life as being anything particularly important until you start using your curiosity to kind of kindle theirs. So a lot of that kind of like, I don't know, that Columbo method of asking a lot of questions and, oh, hey, one more thing. What about this? And all of a sudden you start noticing certain things. And the stuff that they do are things that people don't know about because, again, not everybody has been a server, or not everybody has been at the pizza place, or not everybody has had to be a CSA on camp, kind of community service officer on campus or something like that. And so that's something where um, it's really crucial to kind of dig in on that. So that's how I do it, because I get them to think about it in ways. And then the other thing I do in feature writing is I say, okay, we get into feature writing. I have a 2-hour class. I say, okay, 10 minutes, take off all your headphones, take off all your stuff. You're going to go walk this campus for a half hour, and you're not coming back until you find 4 things that make you interested in anything. I don't care what they are. You don't have to make a story out of it. I don't need 12 sources. All I really need is you literally to look at something that you haven't seen before. And they're like, well, I need my phone. I'm like, leave your phone, leave this, like literally unplug yourself from everything, including the matrix. Just wander, look around, and just open the aperture. Some kid comes back and goes, do you know you can buy a tree? I said, what? It's like, yeah, there's these little plaques like dedicated to people near trees and benches and stuff. I never noticed that. I'm like, okay, so how do you go about getting a plaque? I don't know, but I gotta know. They found out like some kid was like double parking his car constantly because he was the head of the student government. And it turned out like all of a sudden we started noticing there were tickets showing up because another kid went back there. Turns out like the kid's opponent was sending the cops to go ticket this other kid's car. And all of a sudden I'm like, how many scofflaws are there for tickets? Like every time you see tickets, you wonder like how many people don't pay them or do pay them or whatever, or who actually is getting held up. Like, is there somebody out there who like would have graduated in 78 if they just pony up for their parking tickets? But that's how we do it is we send them out and say, get rid of all of the stuff that distracts you and just be in your environment. As you're standing there in line waiting for your buffalo chicken sandwich at Reeve Blackhawk commissary, listen to the stupid freshman who's yammering on in front of you about how unfair it is they have to take this writing course, and then ask yourself, like, what's unfair about it? Be nosy. I can't make you nosy, but I can put you in a better position to be nosy. And that's one way I would do it.
Great. I love that idea. I'm definitely going to be stealing that for my class.
It's all yours. Take everything you got.
So we got two more questions in the chat. I think that's probably what I'll have time for. Just kind of, we're going to end with the one about graduating, but
Okay.
um, how do you write like a painting while still checking off the list of rules of writing?
Okay. Here's what you want to think about. You want to think about the idea of features aren't fluffy. Okay. Features are basically like a coiled steel spring core that is decorated on the outside. Think about the core of the reporting that makes it work. And think about the things that matter, the number of sources, the quality of sources, the quality of the quotes, the structure of the story, the ability to make sense of the things, the fact checking. All of that core is still there. Then you paint around it. That's where, again, something like a narrative thread can add a lot of value. And what a narrative thread basically is like you imagine these chunked blocks, like on this kebab kind of thing, of like, this is the meat that says, this is why they're a professor, or this is why they fix pinball machines, or this is why they're, a family person. And then you weave this thread in and among these things by observing. And that observation is where it allows you to paint. So again, if you want to write about me being, really involved with, say, let's say that I'm like, you want to write about how like I have weird hobbies. Don't write like he has a lot of weird hobbies. Paint a picture where I'm like, hanging over the edge of a 1970s pinball machine with a flashlight on my forehead, sitting there with a little tuning fork, trying to get a little piece to move. And all of a sudden the alarm bell is going off in the machine because I made it work and I bumped my head on the top of the machine, and paint that picture for people. My wife always says, like, people would be amazed if they actually saw you doing half the stuff you do just because you're weird. And I'm like, yeah, that's the key thing. It's the idea of being able to paint in those little bitty spots of show me something. Don't tell it to me, show it to me. Don't say Vince Filak has a lot of weird hobbies. Show me sitting there like sorting baseball cards like on the floor and they're all over the place. And I'm trying to remember where the 86 tops went, because now I have another one and I can't find it. Or if you want to say, he cares about students beyond the classroom, talk about the time where I'm standing out there in the freezing cold helping to jump some kid's car because I'm the only car in the parking lot. That's where the showing comes in, and that's where the painting comes in. One of my favorite things was, again, spending time with somebody. There was this great moment where this kid was doing a profile on an African-American student at a college that really wasn't that diverse. It claimed it was, but basically when you stripped away all of the kind of falderall fakery that went into it, there was a very small community of people who weren't white on that campus. And so he's hanging out with this one African-American guy, and he's talking about how people treat him differently. And you could say that, but what he did was he ends up at this restaurant, like a Flingers or a TGI Fridays or Olive, whatever kind of place, where they put the fake license plates up on the wall. The kid's sitting there having lunch, and the waitress comes over, and the kid asks for a beer. The subject asks for a beer, and the waitress looks at him a little funny, and then says, "Well, do you want a pint or a 23 ounce?" He says, "I'll take a pint," and he leaves. The kid's 18. And immediately, like, the reporter starts showing this moment, and the reporter then has the source explain. He said, "She looked at me, and I could tell she was afraid. She was saying to herself, am I carding him because he's black, or am I carding him because he's underage? And that liberal guilt around here is so great. So if they're going to play it one way, I'm playing it the other and getting what I want." And I'm like, wow, that just painted an entire picture in the middle of a stupid restaurant that I wouldn't want to be in. So that's how you paint those pictures. What are people doing? What are they acting like? How are they around? And that kind of tells you those stories. So that's one good way to do it. The other way is to read like hell so that you can see how other people paint. What else we got?
Okay, I think our last question is from A&M Kingsville. For journalists interested in attending graduate school, would you recommend going straight into the field or attending graduate school right after earning a bachelor's degree?
Okay. When it comes to graduate school, the question I always ask is, why do you want to go? If what your answer is I want to be kind of like on this side of the thing, I want to be in front of a classroom for like literally the most part of my life, and I really want to be a college professor, then getting some experience either between your bachelor's and your master's or your master's and your PhD is fine. And really that's fine. If what you're saying is I did my bachelor's degree and the place I went didn't have a whole lot of X that I really, really fell in love with. Like, let's say that you went to a program and it was a great writing program and you ended up taking like the one class they had on how to do infographics and you fell in love. You found your muse and it was infographics. Go find a master's degree at like a Ball State or someplace like that that has a master's in infographics and get that professional master's degree and then go out into the field in that area that interests you. Um, my reason for going to grad school was kind of pathologically stupid, which was the job market was so bad that I couldn't get a job really with the amount of experience I had. Everybody's looking for 3 years experience. Well, I only had like one. So if I did my master's, I could stay in Madison. I could keep on my parents' insurance at the time. And I could then stay at the State Journal for 2 more years. So I would have a master's and I would have like 3 years of experience, which I figured would be enough to squeeze out another kind of bigger end job. So something that was more, go to work 9 to 5, wear a suit, kind of, really kind of be involved in it at a paper. And instead, I ended up going to Missouri and working the newspaper there and teaching there. But grad school should not be a dodge. It shouldn't be one of those moments like, I don't know what I want to do. I go to grad school. That's like saying, I'm really uncertain about my life. I'm going to marry the first guy I run into at the bar tonight. It's just a bad idea, poorly executed. Grad school, if it gives you something other than a crippling amount of debt, is a great idea. If you're really that interested. So again, if you haven't gotten the piece that you need to be successful at who you want to be, and you think a master's can do that for you, go get that master's and then go to the field. If you're looking for the idea of, I'd like to be a professor someday, you're going to have to get, I can't say you have to anymore. You will be in a much more advantageous position to have opportunities and options if you get the full alphabet soup after your name, if you get the PhD. I know a number of like here, they just dropped one out of every six people who worked here. They went through this place like a tornado. And the only reason that we were safe is because we were tenured faculty. But they got rid of everybody who was adjunct. Anybody who had a master's who was teaching, they're gone. And you don't want to wake up one day going, as a good friend of mine down the hall did. He said, I've been working here for 20 years. I've been teaching all the classes. I've gotten all these awards and stuff. And they just went, yeah, bye. So that kind of thing can protect you a little bit more. Things do change, I know, but when I got mine, which was '03, the guy who got me in told me this is like your version of a union card. You can either go into the field for 25 years and then try to adjunct, or you can bite it down, go for a degree for about 3 or 4 years, and then get the union card, and then it's really hard to get rid of you. And so that's the way I went. So it really depends on what you want to do. And that's not to disparage anybody who doesn't want to go to grad school or anybody who went a different route. It's just, it's a lot harder now to lock into a place or lock into being able to say, like right now, if let's say I wanted to leave, I would have options because so many places have that PhD requirement, whether you need it or not. My PhD didn't make me a better teacher. It didn't make me a better media advisor. It made me a better researcher. And it gave me some other opportunities, but it wasn't like, I open it up and it's a Wonka bar. Ooh, I've got the golden ticket. Now everything's fine. So you can do it without it, but again, it varies. So I would just be a little more aware of that. What else can I tell you? I am at your disposal.
Well, Vince, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this, and we'll hang on when people are leaving if you want to hang back and ask some more questions if anybody has some more time. But this has been incredibly helpful, and I think we're all gonna leave here and open our brains and start wondering about things. That's what I'm gonna do when I walk out of here. So thank
I'm
you.
putting I'm putting my email address in the chat. Anybody who needs anything, just email me. I am happy as hell to do this stuff. Like I said, this is really the best part of my day. So I want to help. That's kind of what makes me do what I do. So if you have anything, whether it's you played at the Timber, holy crap. Okay. Yeah, actually the guy who played Whiffer, the mascot, was one of my students. He autographed a couple of them for me. And then I've got a whole bunch of them over there. I got Fang and all sorts of stuff. So wow, awesome. That is so cool. See, people connect. But no, I am here at your disposal. I absolutely love this, and I can't thank you enough for having me. So thank you.
Thank you.